Thank you very much, Venkat, for a wonderful introduction. I had suggested a few words. Thanks also to Lalita Duperon and Andrea Fowler at the Center for South Asia for working hard in arranging this event. In the interest of time, I'll interpret my topic, which is Kalidasa's Shakuntala in world literature today, rather narrowly, and jump right into it with the barest introduction to Shakuntala or Kalidas. If you're unfamiliar with the play, please plan to follow along as best as you can today. There are some references to particular details in the play, but then do read the book and accompanying material, which are available online, made available by the center. You can write to the center and get a password or a key to access the full text. And if you can, please attend the seminar on February 23rd, when I'll be able to discuss this at much greater length with all of you. We'll have ample time in that session to catch up individually and collectively. Today, what I'll try and do is what professors of comparative literature often do, which is to look for similarities and differences between different objects, and then to make summary judgments about one or more of those objects. I will try in a very compact form, as part of a larger argument, I will try to give you 7 or 8 reasons for the uniqueness of Shakuntala in world literature. So Kalidasa's Shakuntala in world literature today. If we sort through the several speculative accounts of Kalidasa and his plays and poems that have circulated since the 7th century and assess them in the more empirical frameworks of Indian history and literary history, it seems most likely that the poet-playwright, whoever he was as a flesh and blood individual, lived and composed Abhijnanashakuntalam around 400 CE. Indian and Euro-American archives preserve over 1,200 manuscripts of the play in 3 main recensions: the Bengal, the Kashmir, and the Devanagari. My translation, the first fully poetic and literary translation in English, is based on the Devanagari recension as reconstructed in the 12 cumulative critical editions published by the Nirnay Sagar Press since the late 19th century. Shakuntala is a play in 7 acts, runs to 152 pages in the compact penguin format, is about 2.5 times the length of an average modern play, and would need about 5 hours for a full performance, with 2 short intermissions by a company of players ranging from 30 to 60 actors on the stage. It is composed in Sanskrit and 4 Prakrits. It contains stage directions in Sanskrit, and its highly aestheticized discourse for delivery is composed in a combination of prose and verse, with both often troped as svabhavokti, ordinary, natural, everyday speech. But it's a trope, it doesn't just flow. The Devanagari play text contains 191 verse passages or poems, of which 181 are in classical or courtly Sanskrit. The poems are in 26 different verse forms in 2 separate prosodic systems, Akshar Chandas and Matra Chandas, for those of you who know the system. But all of them have a Chatushpadi or 4-stride quatrain-like structure. The work as a whole uses approximately 50 different figures of speech and figures of thought, tropes, from the repertoire of Sanskrit poetics, of which simile and metaphor are just 2. The plotting of the dramatic action exemplifies the principles of chronological order and spatial form formulated in the Natya Shastra, which was put into manuscript form around 300 CE. And the representation of emotions in the play covers all 49 stable emotions, ancillary emotions, and psychosomatic emotional symptoms enumerated in the Ashtarasa or 8 rasa theory of the classical period. The third and fourth long editions of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, I have copies of a couple of the volumes here, so after the food is off the table, you can touch them. I'll pass them around. The third and fourth long editions of the Norton Anthology of World Literature provide my immediate frame of reference to assess the place of Shakuntala in a global literary canon. In autumn of 2008, I was invited to serve as the anthology's South Asia editor and joined a team of 7 other colleagues from around North America. Amongst ourselves, we had first-hand knowledge of some 20 languages and literatures, and secondary familiarity with another 24 textual traditions spanning roughly 4,000 years of history around the planet. Consulting with about 25 advisors in complementary specialties, the 8 of us were able to deal with nearly 100 important literary formations as represented in English and modern English translation. After 4 years of labor on many fronts, Norton published the third long edition of the anthology in 2012, and it is, quite simply, the largest, most inclusive, and most detailed scholarly representation of world literature in English at the present time. It is published in 6 volumes and totals nearly 7,000 pages in a large format, or roughly 5 million words. It includes over 1,100 individual texts. The precise count is 1,122, most of them by approximately 500 named authors. The texts and authors carry substantive scholarly headnotes up to 3,000 words in length, as well as extensive explicatory and interpretive footnotes, and they're grouped chronologically, regionally, generically, formally, and thematically under multi-level introductions, and are accompanied by maps, timelines, illustrations, and bibliographies, as well as a 2-volume, 600-page teaching guide and an online pronunciation audio for several thousand non-English terms in the project recorded by specialists. The 4th long edition of the anthology, with the same basic contours, will be published in June 2018. In both editions, Shakuntala is the only full-length Indian and South Asian work included in its entirety. If we look at Kalidasa's play in this concrete setting, we immediately see aspects of it that are just not visible when we view it against a backdrop either only of Sanskrit literature as a language-bound formation or only of Indian literature as a self-enclosed national literature. The Norton Anthology makes it clear that Shakuntala is the earliest complete freestanding love story in global literary history, that it is the first ever play text to dramatize a full account of 2 lovers on the stage, from love at first sight to conjugal happiness ever after, and that it therefore creates the core paradigm of romantic comedy in world literature without precedent in Greek or Latin. It is also the world's earliest example of cosmic drama that fully works out a theatrical representation of the range of imagined relations among the human, the divine, the animal, the plant, and the mineral worlds. And that gives us not only human beings and gods, but also animals and plants and mineral objects as characters on the stage. This feature, for example, and I refer to something that Venkat mentioned, this feature, for example, that the play thematically spans the entire known universe, made Kalidasa's play a prime source of ecological thought in the earliest phase of the German environmentalist movement, both in the influence of Herder and Goethe in Europe, and in that of Alexander von Humboldt in Europe and the Americas between about 1795 and 1835. Moreover, the Norton Anthology framework shows us that Shakuntala is the earliest Asian play in the canons of world drama. that it embodies a comprehensive aesthetics of text as well as performance that does not have its roots in Aristotelian mimesis or in Platonic dialogism and diegesis or in Greco-Roman conceptions of beauty and representation, and that it still remains to this day the paradigm of autochthonous or fully independent non-European drama and poetics. The significance of Kalidasa's work, however, goes much further. As V. Raghavan pointed out in a superb essay at the end of his long career, around 1983, between the effective death of Latin theatre around 200 CE and the birth of theatre proper with dramatic text in China around the 13th century, India was the only place on earth where drama, theatre and performance culture were alive and flourishing. This 1,000-year interregnum in global theatre history coincides with the chronological span of classical Sanskrit Kavya and Drishya Kavya and of foundational Indian poetics from the Natya Shastra to Mammat and Bhojraj. And as the extraordinary Abhinav Gupta observed around the year 980, Drishya Kavya, I'll define these terms in a moment, Drishya Kavya represents the best of all Kavya, the genre of the Rupak represents the best of Drishya Kavya, the Natak represents the best of the Rupak genre, and Shakuntala represents the best of all Nataks. A brief digression is necessary for an explanation of this assessment. On Abhinav Gupta's conceptual spectrum, Kavya is verbal discourse in Sanskrit and Prakrit, characterized by its aesthetics and literariness, as distinct from theological, legal, philosophical, ritual, and other kinds of instrumental discourse. And Kavya is distinguished by its radical of presentation into two branches, Shravya Kavya, which is poetry that completes its communicative arc in the oral, and auditory channel, and Drishya Kavya, poetry that requires spectacle for its fulfillment and hence has visual, oral, and textual dimensions simultaneously. When Drishya Kavya is specifically tailored for performance, using combinations of dance, music, speech, and enactment in a theatre or performance space, in classical India, outdoors performance spaces were common. Its textual component, the poetically crafted play or performance script, serves as a rupak, third word that I mentioned, a vehicle in language for spectacular representation by a company of actors or performers with artistically modulated sound, movement, and moving visual effects. Rupak divides into 10 major genres and 18 minor genres, each with its own conventions and codes. And I'll give you 3 examples of Rupaks. The Bhan, for example, is a full text as an extended dramatic monologue delivered by a single actor on stage. The Prahasan is a farce with multiple male and female characters, often including rogues, scoundrels, thieves, liars, and other lowlives. Whereas the Natak is the most elaborate and elevated performance vehicle designed for cosmic drama. This is the genre to which Shakuntala belongs. As translated in one of my appendices, Vishwanath's analytical description in his Sahitya Darpan, composed in Odisha in 1384, pins down the genre of the Natak by summarizing the consensus of the preceding 1,000 years, and I'm going to quote his verse definition. The Natak, the best and fullest kind of play, has a plot that uses a famous story and lays it out in 5 main stages in their proper sequence. It depicts the pleasures of love and desire, etc., the range of good deeds, good qualities, various sorts of splendor and prosperity, and the sources of happiness, of sorrow and grief, along with a steady stream of emotions in all their variety. The Natak is organized into acts, at least 5 and up to 10. Its hero comes from a well-known lineage and may be a king with spiritual discipline, a royal sage who is consistently noble, or he may be a god or a celestial being with the same good qualities. A natak's main body of emotion is made up of either love and desire or heroic energy, and its parts provide a taste of all the emotions. Its ending offers a full resolution of its business and arouses great wonder and astonishment. It has 4 or 5 important characters completely occupied with the object of the hero's quest. So this is the model that Shakuntala is considered to be the best historical embodiment of. Abhinav Gupta's single aphoristic judgment that Shakuntala is the best natak and hence the best work of the Indian literary imagination has effectively dictated the play's canonical status in Indian literature among Indian scholars over the past 1,000 years, as well as its status in world literature among Western scholars since its discovery by William Jones in the 1780s. Kalidasa's play therefore occupies a paradigmatic position that is simply unmatched in global dramatic, theatrical, performance, literary, and aesthetic history, but we cannot pinpoint, demonstrate, or explain that position without a transnational perspective. What is even clearer in a comparative framework is that over the past 2,500 years, Shakuntala is the first and foremost global model of a multilingual play. Kalidasa's play text is composed in 5 verbal mediums: classical or poetry Sanskrit and 4 Prakrits that are distinguished not only by geographical region or provenance, but also by their speakers' gender, caste, and socioeconomic class. For example, Shakuntala, Anasuya, and Premvada use Shauraseni, which is one variety spoken in the classical period around the Mathura region. Madhavya, an impoverished Brahmin and King Dushyant's court jester, speaks Maharashtri, used in Western India. The policemen in the royal capital, they appear in Act 6, and I'm going to talk about them in a moment, employ Magdi, and the fisherman, an untouchable by caste, uses Ardha Magdi. 1600 years after it was probably composed, Shakuntala remains the most complex and successful example of dialogue in multiple languages on stage. Kalidas invests his multiple mediums with so much naturalness that a reader immersed in the dramatic action loses sight of the very peculiar Sanskrit-Prakrit artifice that characters speak to each other in different languages without resorting to either a lingua franca or translation. Kalidasa's dexterity with a spectrum of languages that historically span about 1,500 years of linguistic development before his time is coupled with his virtuosity in handling an extraordinary number of 3-dimensional characters simultaneously. Shakuntala has 54 well-defined speaking parts. And although at a pinch the play can be enacted by as few as 30 actors with minor roles doubled up, it remains the vehicle for the largest cast of speaking characters in theatre history, with the sole exception of Goethe's Faust, where parts 1 and 2 of the German texts, parts 1 and 2 of the German texts are taken together. Part 1 by itself has fewer characters. Kalidasa's treatment of speaking parts offers technically the more accomplished alternative to Greek theatre, which even at its final stages in the 2nd century BCE allowed no more than 4 speakers on stage at one time. A planetary perspective also reaffirms that the Natya Shastra is the first poetics in history to theorize an act, an anga, as the fundamental textual as well as performative unit of a play script, rupak, and that Shakuntala is the earliest play in the world canon to present its action with a full-fledged, theoretically defined internal structure of 7 acts and 15 sequential and embedded parts, from prologue or induction to acts, interludes, and formal synthesis of closure, which is called the third vakya. This historical priority of Shakuntala is all important because the Aristotelian Shakespearean 5-act structure of a play, which we take so much for granted, is too easily assumed to be a universal paradigm, even though the act scene division in Renaissance drama is a 17th and 18th century, post-Renaissance drama is a 17th and 18th century French and English invention. Finally, for now, let me highlight one technical component that reinvigorates the repeated claims since the 1780s, made from William Jones to Monier Williams and Arthur Weddell Keith and down to our own times, that Kalidasa is the only playwright in world literature comparable in many qualitative respects to Shakespeare. The methods of characterization that Kalidasa uses in Act 6 of Shakuntala reveal a level of intricacy that has escaped notice so far, because the play has not been analyzed systematically in a global comparative framework. The first 5 acts of Shakuntala display 2 main kinds of characterization. A, the representation of characters who are individuals, whether round or flat, and B, the representation of groups of anonymous or stock characters who function collectively on stage roughly like a chorus. In the interlude to Act 6, which is a different kind of structure that introduces the montage of the act as a whole, Kalidasa employs a third kind of characterization that is without precedent in world drama. Instead of assigning the task of recovering and restoring the lost ring in the story to a notable individual or to a chorus-like group, which would have been the preferred device in a Greek tragedy, he assigns it to a dramatic ensemble, which he then orchestrates without resorting to the functions of a chorus. The dramatic ensemble, in this sense, is distinct from an acting ensemble, in which actors practice enactment in a collective mode, because the dramatic device conceives of its limited action as being collective in its composition and effect in the plot, even though its members are well-defined individuals. The dramatic ensemble of Act 6 contains 4 characters with distinct stage personalities who function in tandem as a collective agent to metamorphose the situation surrounding Dushyanta and Shakuntala, the protagonists. This group brings together the city superintendent, a brother of one of Dushyanta's minor wives, and hence the king's brother-in-law. The Sanskrit word is Shala, antecedent of the modern Indian Sala. But nevertheless, he's a low character. 2 lowly policemen who serve the superintendent, caricatured with the epithets Suchak and Januk, the informer and the informed, respectively, and a fisherman born into a so-called untouchable occupational caste, and hence the lowliest of the play's low characters. The ensemble nature of this group, which is very different from the chorus-like groups in this play, and especially from the choruses played on stage by 12 to 15 actors in Greek tragedies, becomes evident in the structural interdependence of its 4 agents. And this is the crucial point. No one of these 4 characters can perform the task of recovering and restoring Dushyant's ring independently of the others. And each of them performs only one designated part of the task, so that the task as a whole requires all of them to complete their contributions for its accomplishment. The 4 characters enter as an ensemble in one configuration in the marketplace where they arrest the fisherman, and exit in ensemble at the end of the interlude in a changed configuration headed for the wine shop. Kalidasa is the inventor of the successful dramatic ensemble on the world stage in the ancient period. But Shakespeare reinvents the device independently for modern times in plays such as A Midsummer Night's Dream, where the bumbling troupe of actors staging the play within the play comprises a comical dramatic ensemble, and Romeo and Juliet, where the Capulets and the Montagues constitute paired dramatic ensembles warring in the streets of Venice in a blood-soaked tragedy. As a playwright's device, A dramatic ensemble carries out a plot function that is inherently complex because it has several interdependent parts. And such a device is successful when the plot function is well defined and the characters of the ensemble's individual members are tailored to the specific parts of that function, so that the necessity, internal cohesion, and overall dramatic efficacy of the collective are structurally integrated into the mechanics of the plot. In Shakuntala, the interlude to Act 6 is an autonomous tertiary incident that is fastened directly to Dushyant's trajectory in the principal plot, where it performs the coordinated ensemble functions of finding the lost ring, which is done by the fisherman, unearthing the story of its discovery, which is accomplished by the city superintendent and the two policemen together, delivering the ring and the narrative to the king in person, which is performed by the superintendent, and hence breaking the spell of amnesia over Dushyant under Durvasa's amended curse, which is accomplished by the ring on its own. This is where the ring becomes an inanimate character in the play. A comparative technical analysis of this kind, which can only be performed if we take a global perspective, alters our understanding of the magnitude of Kalidasa's accomplishment as craftsman, innovator, and originator. Let me stop there. Wow. Happy to take questions.
Yeah. Open for discussion.